I'm joined on the line by Dr Helen Caldicott. Helen, thank you for joining us here at BayFM.
That's a pleasure.
Now, if there's anyone better on the planet to talk to about Fukushima, I don't know who it is. What is the latest?
Oh, things are grim. It gets actually worse by the day.
Right. So where do we start?
Okay, where do we start?
I know the mass media, you don't hear a word about it. There's nothing coming out to the public.
It's unbelievable. There have been 3 meltdowns, which is just unheard of in the history of the nuclear age. Units 1, 2 and 3. So that means that molten cores of about 100 tons of uranium in 3 reactors have melted their way through 6 inches of steel in the reactor vessel through to the containment floor and possibly through feet of concrete and steel into the earth. Now, the reactors were built on an ancient riverbed, and water pours down from the mountains behind underneath the reactors, and when they were intact it was fine, but now hundreds of tons of water are pouring down every day and sluicing over the molten cores, and about 400 tons per day are pouring into the Pacific Ocean, and pretty radioactive water. And there's no way really to stop that. As well, they're pouring in hundreds of tons a day into the molten cores to keep them cool, because if they're not kept cool, they'll melt down again.
Yeah.
And so that water is being pumped out and stored in over 1,000 huge tanks. There are about 340,000 tons of water in those tanks. Tanks which were built in haste. There are corroding bolts. The seals are made of rubber. Yesterday or the day before, they forgot to close 2 valves, and about 100 tons of water poured out, and it measured 230 million becquerels per litre. 230 million becquerels per litre. You're allowed in Japan, I think, 100 becquerels per litre. So we're talking about astronomical levels of radiation. They think about half of it is strontium-90, which gets into the bones and teeth and causes leukemia and bone cancer. But these sort of leaks are occurring every day. The problem is that the radiation just keeps rising each day. Now, the reactors themselves, or the buildings, are now standing on almost liquefied mud. Reactor 3, building 3 and 4 were severely damaged by the earthquake. So if there's an earthquake greater than 7, building 3 could collapse onto its molten core, and God knows how much radiation would be released. Oh, and the other thing is that in buildings 1, 2 and 3, where there are the molten cores, they have to keep pumping in nitrogen, because a lot of hydrogen is being formed by the reaction of the zirconium cladding of the fuel rods with air, water and cement. And if they don't keep diluting that hydrogen in reactors 1, 2 and 3, then there could be more hydrogen explosions, as there were initially. There were 4 of them, massive explosions. That has to keep going. The water has to be kept poured in. The water has to keep being pumped out into the tanks. They've run out of room to put the tanks. If there's another earthquake greater than 7, many of the tanks will just collapse, and all that water will pour into the Pacific. There's no way to stop this water, it seems, for decades or even longer. So the Pacific is going to become more and more radioactive. Now, it's a big body of water. There'll be a lot of dilution, of course, but the solution to pollution by dilution when it comes to radiation is fallacious, because the food chain bioconcentrates the radiation at each step. Algae, crustaceans, little fish, big fish, and finally concentrates most highly in human bodies. So you can't taste, smell or see radioactive elements in the fish, and it takes 2 to 80 years to develop your cancer once you've eaten radioactive food. Fish swim, of course, thousands of miles. They're already catching bluefin tuna in California containing cesium from Fukushima. They say low levels, but you only need a tiny bit of cesium. You need 1 mutation in a single gene in a single cell to cause cancer years later. So, no radiation is safe. Now, the other thing is Building 4 has been severely damaged. The fuel from that reactor was removed from the core just before the earthquake, serendipitously, and is stored in a cooling pool 100 feet above the ground. There are over 200 tons of highly radioactive fuel in the pool. And if there's another earthquake greater than 7, the whole building would collapse. Down would come the cooling pool. The water would leak out, of course, and the fuel would catch fire, releasing, it would be an atomic fire, releasing about 10 times more cesium than was released at Chernobyl, which could be an absolute catastrophe for Japan, depending on the way the wind's blowing, and also the Northern Hemisphere. The two air masses do not mix at the equator, so atmospheric pollution tends to remain in the Northern Hemisphere. A little bit gets done here, but not much. So we're sitting on the edge of, nuclear catastrophe every day. The Japanese are very proud people. The government has allowed TEPCO, which is an operational company. It knows how to press switches and turn buttons, but it's not a nuclear engineering company, Tokyo Electric Power Company. They're running the whole show. They have subcontracted the work to about 700 different firms, some of whom are the Japanese mafia, the Yakuza, and they're bringing in, collecting homeless people from the streets in various cities and mentally ill people and alcoholics and bringing them in to be the workers and, sort of body sponges of radiation to operate this whole thing. Oh, the other thing is that they are trying to remove those spent fuel bundles from Building 4 from the cooling pool because they're really scared about the whole thing collapsing. But this procedure is very delicate. There's only millimeters between the fuel bundles. The racks on which they're stored have been damaged and bent by the earthquake. It's like a cigarette packet. If you have a cigarette packet that's deformed, the cigarettes you pull out will be broken. That could happen, and releasing a lot of radiation, and the workers would have to then evacuate. This is always done by computer control, but there's no computer control, so they're doing it virtually by hand with a crane. And the other thing is that if several bundles touch each other, you could get another fission reaction, and then people would have to evacuate. So, I can go on, but the situation is quite extreme, and it's a global public health problem. It's not a Japanese problem. It's the world's problem.
Sure.
And the Japanese have not invited in, major engineering companies like Bechtel and the like, who could actually probably help to work out some sort of solution. And TEPCO is trying to save money so that its shareholders are happy. And meanwhile, they want to reopen the reactors in Japan. And I'm just reading an article which says the Japanese government is now going to bring back the evacuees into their homes, which are very radioactive. And they say to the people, don't worry, because we'll keep measuring the radiation for you, and we'll provide health care for you. Wow. The whole thing is obscene.
Well, that was one of my questions. Where do they get the people to work on these reactors? Because it's obviously very, very dangerous.
Well, they're bringing in, there are a lot of old people volunteering because they say, we're too old now to get our cancers. We'll die before they develop. Oh, that's my phone. Sorry.
That's okay. We can pause if you like.
Okay. Hello? Yeah. Okay, I'm doing an interview right now. Can you call me back in about 20 minutes? Thanks. Sorry, it was Channel 7. Yeah.
So, Helen, have media been contacting you? Because, the main media, the mass media...
The main media have not. Certainly, I do interviews about every day on, community stations and stations in America and stuff. I'm going to do an HBO interview in Sydney next Friday for America, but on the whole, the main media have not come to me, no.
Right. And why do you think they're ignoring it? Surely this is a great news story. They can get a lot of mileage out of it.
You would think so, wouldn't you? Well, first of all, it was Australian uranium that was in those reactors, so we're going to be killing people.
Oh.
already 75 children under the age of 18 in Fukushima have developed confirmed or suspected thyroid cancers, which is just the tip of the iceberg. It's just going to get worse and worse. Thousands of people are going to get cancer for sure. Deformed babies will be born. There was an increase in neonatal infant mortality after the accident, as there was at Chernobyl. And I've just written several papers comparing Chernobyl and Fukushima, and it's really going to be quite devastating. And, you know, TEPCO and the Japanese government are even building a huge cancer hospital in Fukushima, which tells you everything, in Fukushima City. I'm about to do a 6-city speaking tour of Japan in March,
wow,
talking about all of these things.
So isn't that quite a risky?
Well, I say, look, I'm not going to any radioactive areas for sure, and you've got to feed me non-radioactive food, which is food that comes from the southwest of Japan, because, you know, huge areas of Japan are now contaminated, and the food's contaminated, and the fish.
Well, I just, while I was waiting to talk to you, I saw something on CNN. The latest is that a whole heap of sailors that were on an aircraft carrier suing.
Well, I had 2 of those sailors. I had a conference at the New York Academy of Medicine last March on the 2nd anniversary of Fukushima, and 2 of them came to testify. And they're part of the suit that's being filed against TEPCO. Actually, it should be GE2 who is being sued, and the Navy, because the Navy knew damn well. I mean, they took the ship to within 2 miles of the reactor at the middle of the meltdown with, you know, and these people got heavily contaminated. Of course, the Navy is saying they didn't, but they did. And they hosed them down, they decontaminated them, they scrubbed them till their skin nearly fell off. They were drinking desalinated water from the sea, which clearly was radioactive, and showering in it. And a lot of them have developed illnesses these 2 had. And then the Navy made them sign a document to say that the Navy bore no responsibility and they wouldn't ever do anything for them, and they had to sign it before they left the Navy, and they're getting no medical care. So
what can we do?
Well, I'll tell you what we can do. We can stop exporting our down uranium, because, you know, this is the end result of exporting uranium. And there's a big push now, and especially in South Australia by Barry Brook at the University of Adelaide, is pushing for nuclear power in Australia, and others. I don't know where their heads are, but they're talking about modular reactors, which have never been built, just on the drawing board. They make as much waste as other reactors. They're just as dangerous. They could melt down, and Australia won't go for nuclear power anyway. It's ridiculous. We're bathed in sun, blown by wind. You know, we should have solar panels on every house and every parking lot, and solar cars and you know, wind power. So I don't quite understand what is happening in Adelaide with these people, because that's where we started the whole anti-uranium campaign in the 70s, campaign against nuclear energy. I do know that they're associated, I think, with the London School of Economics, and I think they're getting funding from various nuclear sources, what I think.
Okay. Now, when it all melts down, which I can see it happening, you know, the chances of another earthquake of the magnitude of 7 is pretty good. When that all happens, what should we be doing? What can we do to protect ourselves? I know, but
I mean, what are you trying to suggest? There's nothing you can take, except you can take inert potassium iodide if you know you're going to be enveloped in a cloud of radioactive gases after there's been a meltdown. But it usually happens pretty fast. I mean, the wind blows it pretty quickly, and usually, almost uniformly, you're not told. They try and hide it for several days or even weeks, which they did partly at Chernobyl and certainly at Fukushima. They didn't want to create panic. Now, if you take potassium iodide, that blocks the uptake of radioactive iodine into the thyroid, but only blocks 70% of it. The other thing is that cesium concentrates in the thyroid too. So you can't take anything else that will sluice or wash or move the contaminants out of various organs once you have inhaled or ingested radioactive elements. They tend to stay in the body in various places. Strontium-90 tends to stay for a lifetime because it's the calcium analog. It's like calcium.
Okay, well, last time I spoke to you, I said, what should we not eat? And you said sushi. Definitely don't eat sushi.
Don't eat any Japanese food. None. No rice, no miso, no seaweed, nothing. They're actually canning and exporting a fair bit of their radioactive food to other countries. Hillary Clinton signed a deal just after the Fukushima accident that America would keep importing Japanese food, which is really crazy. Be very careful what you eat. Only eat Australian food. I don't eat European food either, because 40% of the European landmass or area is currently radioactive and will be for hundreds of thousands of years. And you don't know what olive oil from Spain or what wine from France carries radioactive elements. So I'm pretty careful. I look on the labels to see where the food is sourced from.
Okay. Well, that sounds like a pretty dire situation, Helen.
It is from a medical perspective.
Is there any positiveness that we can look forward to here? Do you think the world's going to react, and do you think Japan will eventually ask for help?
That's not clear. I think if there's another earthquake, they're going to have to. Abe is a really dangerous prime minister. He's wanting to remilitarize Japan. And when I was a little girl, the Japanese got to Sydney Harbour and Dad dug an air raid shelter, and we were really scared, and Mum thought we were going to be talking Japanese soon. So once they get going, they can be, pretty difficult. That's the first thing. And the second thing is they're lining up with America to, take on China, because America needs a new enemy. Pentagon always needs enemies, and they're ringing China with anti-missile bases and heaven knows what. And then, they want to reopen the reactors, but I think if there is another major accident, the whole world will then again be focused on Fukushima. But I stress again, the only person you can change is you. You can say, well, there's a thing called the aorta syndrome. Aorta fix the bridges and aorta fix this and aorta. No, I have to. And unless you take it on yourself to do the right thing in Australia, and we own 30 to 40% of the world's richest uranium, and we close down those mines. And we can. I mean, we had a huge movement in the 70s against that, and I went and talked to unions all over Australia and about the dangers of mining uranium, in particular, the dangers of getting their testicles irradiated when they mine the uranium, what that means to their children and descendants. And the ACTU banned uranium mining for 5 years. So it's definitely possible if you decide to lead the revolution, against uranium mining and the revolution for renewable energy all over the country and close down the coal-fired plants. I mean, things are grim, and we've got a very dangerous government at the moment. But I don't feel any grassroots movement rising up to try and, do anything about it at the moment. And that's partly because of what you said, Oliver, that the major press are not attending to this.
All right, Helen. Well, I'll see if I can put the word out there and start getting the message out.
You're a good man, Oliver.
Thanks for talking to us,
Thank
Dr.
you,
Helen Caldicott.
Okay. Bye.
Bye. Take care.